Have you ever been judged before you even spoke a word? Imagine sitting in first class beside your child, calm, proud, and grateful for how far you've come, only to watch a flight attendant's smile fade the moment she sees your skin. One moment, you're just a father taking a quiet trip. The next, you're being told you don't belong. What would you do? Raise your voice and demand respect, or stay silent, letting dignity do the talking? Because sometimes, the real test of strength isn't how loud we fight, but how deeply we choose to forgive. This is the story of a man who could have shamed his oppressors but instead taught them grace. A story about silence that spoke louder than anger, and about how justice can land softly, like a plane after turbulence. If you were in his place, would you choose rage or redemption? Stay with us as we unfold Flight Attendant Removes Black CEO's Son from First Class, only to learn he bought the airline. If stories of courage, dignity, and change move you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because some journeys don't just take off, they lift us all higher. Morning rain glazed the glass walls of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, turning the runway lights into long streaks of gold. Inside the first-class boarding area, a quiet rhythm of voices and suitcase wheels blended with the smell of roasted coffee and fresh linen. Elias Carter adjusted his dark blue blazer and checked his boarding pass. His posture was calm, almost understated, the kind of stillness that comes from years of discipline and quiet authority. Beside him, his 17-year-old daughter, Nia, scrolled through photos on her phone, her hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes full of that teenage mix of curiosity and nervous excitement. They weren't flying for business this time. It was supposed to be a father-daughter trip, a short escape before Nia's senior year began. A few days in New York, museums, pizza, and long talks about college dreams. Elias smiled softly as he watched her. "You'll like New York," he said. Nia nodded. "I've seen it in movies my whole life. It's about time I see it for real." A gate announcement hummed overhead. Skyhaven Airways Flight 241 Seattle to New York, now boarding first class. Elias stood, gesturing toward the line forming near the glass doors. Ready, Nia slung her backpack over one shoulder. "Let's do this." They walked forward together. Just another pair of travelers, at least. That's how it should have been. As they approached the scanner, the gate agent smiled politely. But the woman standing just beyond the gate, Lauren Miller, the flight attendant in charge of first class, noticed them and hesitated. For a moment, her smile faltered only slightly, but enough for Nia to notice. Lauren was a professional. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, her hair tucked under her cap, her name tag gleaming. Years of airline service had taught her to smile on cue, to treat every first-class passenger as royalty. Yet, when her eyes rested on Elias and Nia, something shifted, not open hostility, but that subtle pause, that flicker of uncertainty. Elias caught it. He always did. He'd spent years reading people's eyes before their words, but he said nothing. When they reached the boarding door, Lauren spoke in that polished, trained tone of politeness that somehow carried distance underneath. "Good morning, sir. May I see your boarding passes again?" Elias handed them over without hesitation. "They were scanned at the gate," he said gently. "I understand," Lauren replied, flipping the passes between her manicured fingers. "But sometimes mistakes happen. We've had issues with seat upgrades recently." Her words hung in the air. The businessman behind them glanced up from his phone. Nia shifted slightly closer to her father. Lauren's eyes lingered a bit too long on the names printed in bold Elias Carter and Nia Carter. Finally, she smiled, tight and professional. "Thank you. You'll find your seats in 2A and 2B. "Thank you," Elias said, voice calm as stone polished by time. They stepped into the plane. The cabin smelled of citrus polish and warm bread. Rows of wide leather seats glowed under soft amber lights. Nia's face lit up. "Wow," she whispered. "This looks like a movie." Elias chuckled quietly. "It's just a plane, sweetheart. Don't let the leather fool you." They sat down. A middle-aged man across the aisle nodded a casual greeting. Two women in designer coats chatted softly over glasses of champagne. The atmosphere was hushed luxury. Lauren made her way down the aisle, greeting passengers by name: Mr. Chen, Ms. Porter, Mr. Jacobs. But when she reached Elias's row, her tone cooled again. "Would you like something to drink before takeoff?" she asked. "Yes," Elias replied. "Just water. Please." "For me too," Nia added politely. Minutes later, Lauren returned. The other passengers' drinks sparkled in crystal glasses. "For the Carters." She set down two clear plastic cups. Nia noticed instantly. "Dad," she whispered, "why are ours different?" Elias looked at the cups, then at the others, and smiled faintly, as though he'd seen this scene before. Lesson number 1, he said softly. Sometimes silence teaches louder than anger. Nia nodded, unsure what to feel: confusion, embarrassment, or pride in her father's calm. Outside, rain traced silver lines across the window. Engines rumbled. The aircraft doors closed. The world outside blurred into mist. Lauren walked past again, checking seat belts and storage bins. Her steps were crisp, efficient, but when her eyes brushed over Elias and Nia again, she hesitated just long enough for it to feel deliberate. "Excuse me," she said, stopping. "Your daughter appears quite young. We do have policies regarding minors in first class without adult supervision." Elias looked up, voice steady. "She's not alone." "Of course," Lauren replied, a faint blush creeping into her cheeks. "I just meant she might be more comfortable in our main cabin." The words dropped like ice water. A woman 2 rows back lowered her magazine. A man paused mid-sip of wine. Nia's cheeks burned. "I'm fine here," she said quietly. Elias turned his gaze toward Lauren, calm, unshaken. "Our tickets are correct," he said simply. Lauren nodded curtly and moved on, but her expression lingered in the reflection of the window, a mixture of pride, discomfort, and something else. Nia swallowed hard. "Dad, why does this keep happening?" Elias looked out at the rain-drenched tarmac. "Because some people forget to see before they judge," he said. "But it's not our job to make them see. It's our job to stay steady while they learn." She didn't fully understand what he meant yet, but she could feel the weight of it, the kind of lesson that doesn't fade after landing. As the engines roared to life, the plane trembled slightly, preparing for takeoff. Nia closed her eyes, trying to shake the unease in her chest. Lauren's voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Skyhaven Airways, Flight 241 nonstop service to New York." Elias adjusted his seatbelt and whispered, "Sometimes change comes midair." Nia turned toward him. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "You'll see." The engines deepened their hum. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft gold. Outside, the plane began to roll forward, gathering speed, lifting quietly, carrying a story that was only just beginning. The jet leveled above the clouds, slicing through pale morning light. Cabin lights glowed soft and warm. To anyone else, it was an ordinary flight. Yet for Nia, the air felt heavier than it should. Every whispered laugh, every sideways glance from the other passengers, pressed like static against her chest. Lauren moved through the aisle with mechanical grace, refilling glasses, arranging napkins, checking seat belts that were already fastened. When she reached row 2, her rhythm faltered again. "Is everything comfortable for you two?" she asked, her smile taut. Elias nodded. "We're fine. Thank you." Lauren hesitated, eyes flicking toward Naya. "If she needs headphones or a magazine more suited for younger travelers, please let me know." "I'm good," Nia answered quickly. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Lauren moved on, leaving behind a silence that hummed louder than the engines. Nia turned to the window, blinking against tears that had nothing to do with altitude. Elias reached for his tablet, pretending to read, but he was watching his daughter's reflection in the glass. He recognized that look, the first real encounter with unfairness that words can't fix. He leaned slightly toward her. "Do you know why I brought you on this trip?" She shook her head. "Because I wanted you to see the world the way it is," he said softly. "Not always kind, but still worth believing in." Her lips pressed together. She didn't trust her voice enough to answer. Across the aisle, a businessman whispered something to his wife. Both looked at Elias, then looked away. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Lauren returned again, holding a tray of croissants and fruit bowls. She set down 2 trays in front of the Carters, one of them missing the silverware. "Excuse me," Elias said. "We didn't get utensils." "Oh, my mistake." Lauren's cheeks reddened. She hurried away. Nia stared at the empty spot where the fork should have been. "She keeps doing that." She murmured, "Little things. Like she wants us to notice but doesn't want anyone else to." Elias spoke quietly. People reveal themselves in details. Minutes passed. The engine steadied. Flight 241 cruised over the Rockies, but tension still hovered. Nia pulled her blanket closer. She felt both invisible and too visible at once. Lauren approached again, her posture straighter now, her tone clipped. "Mr. Carter, could I verify something with you? There's been a mix-up in our manifest." Elias raised an eyebrow. "A mix-up?" "Yes," she said. "It shows 2 first-class seats under the same booking code as a corporate client. I need to confirm it's not a duplicate reservation." He held her gaze for a long second. "And what makes you think it might be?" Lauren's breath caught. "It's just standard protocol, sir." He handed over his phone, screen open to the airline's confirmation email. Protocol should serve people, not embarrass them. Her hand trembled slightly as she took the phone. The businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper again. The hum of the aircraft seemed to pause. Lauren scanned the screen, cheeks tightening. "Thank you. That clears it up." She placed the phone back on his tray and stepped away too quickly, bumping the armrest of the passenger behind her. Nia exhaled slowly. "How do you stay so calm?" Dad Elias smiled faintly. "Because anger teaches nothing. Calm makes people hear their own noise. For the first time," she smiled back weakly, "but it was there. Ding!" The seatbelt sign blinked on as light turbulence rippled through the cabin. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, steady, reassuring. "Folks, we'll be hitting some rough air for a few minutes. Please remain seated." Lauren secured the galley, then returned to her station near the cockpit. She stole one more glance at the Carters. Something in Elias's composure unsettled her. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. He looked like a man who carried authority without needing to prove it, and that bothered her more than she could admit. The turbulence eased. Passengers relaxed, laughter returning, but Lauren's mind kept circling. She'd built her career on controlling her tone, her posture, her environment. environment. Yet one calm man and his silent daughter were shaking that illusion. At row 2, Nia took a small notebook from her bag and began sketching the outline of the plane's wing. Elias watched, proud. "You really love how things fly, don't you?" She nodded. "I think about how engineers have to trust what they can't see the air itself." He smiled. "That's how we live, too, trusting what isn't visible." Lauren overheard it while checking overhead bins. For reasons she couldn't explain, the words landed heavily. A light chime sounded from the galley, an internal message from the captain. "David Brooks." "Lauren, could you step up for a moment?" She went forward, closing the curtain behind her. David's voice was low. "Everything all right back there?" "Of course," she replied too quickly. He gave her a measured look. "I caught your face earlier. You sure nothing's wrong with row 2? Lauren hesitated. "It's fine. They just don't exactly fit our usual profile." David's brow furrowed. "What profile is that?" She realized how it sounded. "I didn't mean forget it." He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "Profiles are why we still need reminders about respect." She returned to the cabin, his words gnawing at her. Each step back toward row 2 felt heavier. When she reached the aisle, Elias was adjusting his watch, and Nia was asleep with her head against the window. Lauren stared at them for a heartbeat longer than she should have. Then she looked away. The plane began its slow descent toward New York. Clouds thickened, city lights blinking faintly beneath. Lauren took a deep breath and picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent. Please make sure your seats are upright." Her voice was steady, but inside she was restless. She wanted the flight to end, to escape the quiet reflection staring back at her from seat 2A. As she walked past one last time, Elias spoke without looking up. "Ms. Miller, thank you for your service." She froze, unsure if he meant it as courtesy or reminder. "You're welcome, sir." The wheels touched down with a soft thud. Applause rippled from the back rows. For most passengers, the flight was over. For Lauren Miller, it had only just begun. The jet taxied to the gate, and passengers stood, stretching and reaching for overhead bags. Nia stayed seated, looking out at the streaks of rain clinging to the window. She could see the reflection of her father's calm face beside hers. That stillness he carried, it wasn't just patience, it was history. Lauren made her final rounds, smiling automatically, thanking passengers for flying Skyhaven. Her voice quivered on the edges of exhaustion. She wanted the door to open, the passengers to leave, and the unease inside her to quiet down. "Enjoy your stay in New York," she said as each traveler passed. When she reached row 2, Elias rose slowly, collected his briefcase, and met her eyes. "Thank you for the flight," he said. Nia stood beside him, polite but distant. Lauren hesitated. Something in his composure, no bitterness, no sarcasm, made her want to say something more, but words failed her. She nodded and looked away. The jet bridge filled with the metallic scent of rain and jet fuel. Elias placed a hand lightly on Nia's shoulder. "Let's go." They stepped into the terminal. The world outside the aircraft seemed too bright, too clean for what had just lingered in the air behind them. As they walked toward baggage claim, 2 uniformed employees approached, their pace brisk but faces uneasy. One of them, a young man with the badge security liaison, spoke first. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Price would like a word before you leave the terminal." Nia looked up at her father. "Who's that director of customer service?" He answered quietly. "It seems our flight drew attention. They were escorted through a side corridor lined with posters about safety and hospitality. The contrast made Nia's chest tighten. In a small glass-walled conference room, Rachel Price waited, her expression carefully arranged between professionalism and apology. She stood as they entered. "Mr. Carter, Miss Carter, thank you for taking a moment. I understand your flight experience may not have been ideal." Elias took a seat without removing his jacket. "That's one way to describe it." Rachel folded her hands. "We received a report from the flight attendant regarding an issue with seat verification." Elias's eyes lifted. "Steady. Interesting. Because from where I sat, the only issue was assumption." The air thickened. Nia's fingers twisted in her lap. Rachel exhaled softly. "I'd like to understand what happened in your own words." Elias leaned back. "You'll find it in your system log soon enough. The situation began before the plane even left Seattle. But what matters isn't what she said. It's what she believed." Rachel blinked. "Believed?" He nodded. "That we didn't belong where we were." Lauren was summoned moments later. She entered with her posture straight but her pulse racing. When she saw them seated, her throat tightened. "Ms. Miller," Rachel said gently, "please take a seat." Lauren sat opposite the Carters, eyes darting between father and daughter. "I just wanted to make sure the manifest was accurate." She began. Elias said nothing. His silence filled the room more powerfully than any argument could. Rachel tapped a pen against her notepad. "I appreciate your intention to follow procedure, but it seems perception played a role here." Lauren's voice cracked slightly. "I wasn't trying to offend anyone." Elias finally spoke. "Intentions don't erase consequences." The words hung there, measured, not harsh. Nia glanced at him. His voice was calm, but she could feel the quiet fire behind it. Lauren swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't mean to." He raised a hand gently. "I'm not here for apologies. I've heard too many of them in too many rooms just like this one. What I want is accountability, not comfort." Rachel sat forward. "Mr. Carter, you have my word. We'll handle this with care." Elias reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the table. Inside were printed reports numbers, charts, complaint summaries. "These are public records," he said evenly. 32 complaints involving passengers of color on Skyhaven flights in the last 6 months. No follow-up actions documented. Rachel's breath caught. "Where did you gather them myself?" he replied. "Because I've been watching this airline long before today." Lauren looked bewildered. "Why because?" he said. "My company is in final talks to acquire it." The room froze. Rachel's face paled. "Excuse me." Elias met her gaze. "Aerofuture Systems is negotiating a controlling stake in Skyhaven Airways. I wanted to understand what culture I'd be inheriting. Now I do." Lauren's eyes widened, her pulse pounding in her ears. "You're the Elias Carter." He nodded once. "Just a passenger today. The same as anyone else should have been." Silence followed, a deep, trembling kind that strips pretense bare. Rachel tried to recover. "Mr. Carter, please believe I do," he said quietly. "I believe this isn't about one person. It's about what happens when no one speaks up." He turned to Lauren. "Do you know what hurt most? Ms. Miller." She couldn't meet his eyes. "That I made you feel unwelcome." He shook his head slightly. "That you made my daughter think she didn't belong anywhere she worked hard to reach." Nia blinked rapidly, tears threatening. She wanted to say something to defend her father, to comfort him, but she sensed he didn't need either. Lauren's voice trembled. I was wrong. Rachel cleared her throat softly. We can discuss disciplinary actions. Elias raised his hand again. That won't be necessary. Firing her won't fix what's broken. Lauren stared at him, confusion mixing with shame. He looked at Rachel. Instead, I want this airline to start a bias reform program. Training, accountability, transparency. And I want Ms. Miller to help build it. Rachel blinked. You'd keep her employed? Yes, he said. Redemption isn't about removal. It's about responsibility, Lauren whispered. You trust me with that? Elias's expression softened. Trust is earned through what you do next, not what you say now. For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside the glass walls, rain slid down the runway lights like tears of melted gold. Nia finally found her voice. Dad. He turned toward her. Can we really change something? That big, Elias smiled faintly. We can start small. That's how every flight begins, with one takeoff. Lauren's eyes glistened. For the first time that day, she didn't look away. Rachel closed the folder and exhaled. Mr. Carter. We'll do it. I'll personally oversee the initiative. He nodded once, stood, and offered his hand, not to Rachel, but to Lauren. She hesitated before shaking it, the gesture trembling between shame and gratitude. When he and Nia walked out into the terminal, the noise of travelers returning to their routines filled the air again. Rolling suitcases, laughter, announcements. But for Lauren Miller, the world sounded different now. She sank back in her chair, staring at the folder he'd left behind. Inside those pages were not just numbers, but reflections of herself, of every unchecked assumption she'd ever made. Outside, Nia looked up at her father as they reached the exit. You didn't yell at her. Elias smiled gently. I didn't need to. Silence can speak louder than any voice, if it carries truth. Nia nodded, and for the first time since they left Seattle, she felt lighter. Behind them, the glass walls reflected the runway lights, each one flickering like a quiet promise that some storms end, not with thunder, but with understanding. The next morning, headlines were already stirring across the industry. Aerofuture Systems completes. Majority acquisition of Skyhaven Airways. The announcement hit news feeds before sunrise, with photographs of Elias Carter shaking hands at a press conference in Midtown Manhattan. He looked composed, deliberate, untouchable. To the world, it was another corporate victory. To Elias, it was the continuation of something deeper, a chance to prove that change could start with grace rather than vengeance. From the window of their hotel room overlooking the Hudson River, Nia watched the morning fog drift between buildings. She held a cup of coffee. She barely sipped. Do you think people know what happened on that plane? Elias folded his tie neatly, his reflection calm in the mirror. Some will, most won't, but truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to last. Nia studied him. I still don't get how you can be so kind after what she did. He smiled gently. Kindness isn't weakness, Nia. It's strategy. By noon. They arrived at the Skyhaven headquarters' sleek glass towers near LaGuardia, the company logo shining above the revolving doors. The lobby buzzed with energy and unease. Everyone had seen the announcement. Everyone knew who he was now. Rachel Price waited near the elevators, her tone professional, but her eyes cautious. Mr. Carter. Ms. Carter, welcome. The board is gathered upstairs. Elias nodded. Let's not keep them waiting. Inside the elevator, Nia looked up at the display ticking upward. Are you nervous always? Elias replied softly. But nerves are just reminders that what we're doing matters. The boardroom stretched wide, its walls glass and its table shining under cold white lights. Executives sat in neat rows, polished, silent, some curious, some defensive. Rachel began introductions, but Elias raised a hand. Before we talk numbers, I'd like to address something else. Culture. Murmurs passed around the table. He placed a single sheet of paper in front of him. In the last 6 months, Skyhaven received over 30 discrimination complaints. Yesterday's flight was number 33. The problem isn't lack of training, it's lack of accountability. A man in a gray suit cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, we regret what happened, but isolated incidents don't reflect our values. Elias met his gaze. Then your values are hidden too deep to find. The room fell silent. Nia, seated behind him, felt the shift the moment when everyone realized he wasn't here to embarrass anyone, but to demand something more lasting. He continued, voice steady. We'll establish an independent review panel. Every complaint will be tracked, verified, and resolved transparently. And starting immediately, we're building a new initiative, Sky Relearn. Rachel frowned slightly. Sky Relearn. An internal reform program, he said, will retrain every frontline employee, from flight attendants to executives, on empathy, equality, and perception. We'll confront bias the way pilots confront turbulence by adjusting course before damage is done. One of the executives leaned forward. That's a costly process, sir. Elias's expression didn't change. So is ignorance. Rachel studied him for a moment. Something in his conviction was contagious. He turned slightly toward her. I'd like Ms. Miller assigned to the Sky Relearn pilot group. She'll help design it from the ground up. Rachel hesitated. She's still under evaluation. Exactly why she should start here? He interrupted calmly. No one objected after that. His authority was quiet, but absolute. After the meeting, in the hallway lined with framed photos of aircraft and employees, Rachel caught up to him. Mr. Carter, do you really think she can handle it? Elias slowed his pace. She'll have to. Real change doesn't begin with comfort. It begins with discomfort. Later that afternoon, Lauren Miller sat in a small conference room staring at an email notification. Subject assignment, Sky Relearn Program. Her heart pounded as she reread the message. She was to report to the training division Monday morning. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. The image of Nia's face on the plane flashed in her mind. Hurt, confused, dignified. Guilt pressed down heavier than any uniform she'd ever worn. The knock on her door startled her. Rachel stood there, holding a folder. Lauren, she said, you've been selected for the reform initiative. Lauren nodded slowly. I saw. I'm not sure if that's a punishment or a second chance. Maybe both. Rachel replied, Mr. Carter believes you can help fix what happened. I think he's giving you something most people never get. Lauren's voice trembled. Redemption responsibility, Rachel said softly. Redemption comes later. That night, Lauren sat alone at her kitchen table, uniform folded neatly beside her. The city hummed outside. For the first time, she replayed every moment of that flight in her mind, every glance, every assumption. The sound of Elias's calm voice haunted her. Intentions don't erase consequences. She opened her laptop and began typing notes for her first training session. The title at the top read, Bias Hides in Politeness. Meanwhile, across the city, Elias sat by the hotel window, reviewing project drafts for Aero Future's next engineering proposal. But his mind kept drifting back to Lauren. Nia entered, holding 2 mugs of tea. You're still thinking about her, aren't you? He smiled faintly. I'm thinking about what she represents. If one person can unlearn what they were taught wrong, maybe a system can too. Nia handed him the tea and sat beside him. It's weird, though. Part of me feels bad for her. That's empathy, he said. Don't lose it. Empathy keeps us from becoming what we fight. Nia leaned against his shoulder. Do you ever get tired of being the one who stays calm? He looked out at the skyline shimmering across the river. Every day, he admitted quietly. But losing calm means losing purpose. The following week arrived quickly. Lauren stood in front of a room of 20 new flight attendants. Palms slightly damp, voice unsteady at first. She began, You're here to learn about hospitality. But before that, you need to learn about humility. She paused, meeting the eyes of a young trainee who reminded her of Nia. Bias doesn't always wear a hateful face. She continued, Sometimes it hides behind rules we follow without asking why. After the session, she found Rachel waiting outside the training hall. How did it go? Rachel asked. Lauren smiled weakly. I think I learned more than they did. Rachel handed her a folder. Mr. Carter asked for progress updates. He wants to review the curriculum personally. Lauren's expression softened. He doesn't give up. Does he? Rachel shook her head. That's why people follow him. That evening, Elias received the first report in his inbox. Attached was a short note from Lauren. I can't change what happened on that plane, but I can make sure it never happens again. He read it twice before closing his laptop. His reflection in the dark screen stared back at him, a man who believed that the quietest revolutions begin with understanding. Outside, the city lights flickered against the night sky, like constellations trying to find new shapes. In another room down the hall, Nia was journaling. Her final line read, Maybe justice doesn't have to roar. Maybe it just needs to listen. She smiled, closed the notebook, and drifted to sleep, unaware that her father's calm insistence on dignity was already reshaping an entire airline and perhaps one small piece of the world. 3 months had passed since that tense meeting at headquarters. The Sky Relearn program had transformed from a proposal into a living, breathing initiative. Its classrooms were now filled with staff in crisp uniforms, notebooks open, expressions guarded but curious. Lauren stood at the front of one such room, beneath a projection screen that read, Perception versus Reality, the Hidden Weight of Bias. Her palms no longer trembled when she spoke. Bias, she began, isn't always loud. It doesn't always look like hate. Sometimes, it's just the silence you allow when you should speak. The room was still. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause. Lauren continued, her voice steady. I learned that lesson 30,000 feet above the ground from a man and his daughter who didn't owe me forgiveness but gave me understanding instead. At the back of the room, Rachel watched quietly, arms crossed, a faint smile forming. She had seen Lauren change less mechanical, more human. Her tone no longer carried defensiveness, only humility. Lauren turned to the group. You might think this training is about being polite. It's not. It's about courage. The courage to question your habits before they hurt someone. A young trainee raised his hand. Ms. Miller, can I ask, how do you know when it's bias and not just a mistake? Lauren nodded thoughtfully. You know because you feel it. If your decision starts from doubt about someone's worth, it's not procedure, it's prejudice. The class fell silent again. Someone in the back wiped a tear discreetly. When the session ended, Rachel approached her. You found your voice, she said softly. Lauren exhaled. I just borrowed a bit of his. Rachel smiled knowingly. Miss Carter. Lauren nodded. He said redemption isn't comfort, it's responsibility. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Later that afternoon, Lauren was summoned to the 12th floor conference room. The skyline of New York stretched endlessly through the glass walls. Elias was waiting there, reviewing a series of data charts spread across the table. He looked up when she entered. "Ms. Miller?" he said, his tone warm but formal. "Please, have a seat." "Thank you, sir." He gestured to the reports. Passenger satisfaction up 23%, complaints down 48%, training attendance near full capacity. That's not bad for the first quarter. Lauren smiled faintly. "The credit goes to the team." Elias shook his head. "The credit goes to whoever cared enough to make others see differently." She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I never thanked you properly for what you did, for letting me stay." He studied her expression. "I didn't keep you out of pity. I kept you because your mistake had meaning. Pain without purpose is wasted." Lauren nodded, eyes damp. "I think I needed to break before I could rebuild." Elias leaned back, folding his hands. "That's how most of us grow." The cracks let the light in. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't tense this time. It was peaceful, mutual. Then Elias said, "There's someone I'd like you to meet." He pressed the intercom button. "Send them in, please." The door opened, and David Brooks, the pilot from Flight 2 or 1, stepped in, his uniform neatly pressed, his presence calm and steady. Lauren blinked in surprise. "Captain Brooks." He smiled. "Just David today." Elias gestured between them. "David will be joining the Sky Relearn Initiative as our liaison for flight operations. I want the two of you to collaborate. Bias isn't just a cabin issue. It's everywhere, from the cockpit to the boardroom." Lauren extended her hand. "It's good to see you again." David shook it firmly. "Likewise. I think this program's long overdue." Elias rose. "Good. Then let's make it count." As they left the room together, Lauren felt something shift inside her, like a weight lifting. She wasn't just fixing her past anymore. She was shaping the future. That evening, back at their hotel, Elias and Nia shared dinner by the window. The city below shimmered like a constellation come to life. Nia asked, "So, how's your reform project going?" Elias smiled. "Better than I hoped. People are learning, slowly. It's not perfect, but progress never is." Nia set her fork down. "I read about Ms. Miller in the company newsletter. She's leading workshops now. You were right about her." He chuckled softly. "I wasn't right. I was hopeful. Hope can sound foolish until it works." Nia grinned. "You should put that on a t-shirt." Elias laughed, a rare, deep sound that filled the room. "Maybe I should." Across the city, in her small apartment, Lauren sat at her desk, reviewing tomorrow's lesson plan. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject Sky Relearn Employee Reflections. Attached were anonymous messages from trainees. One read, "I didn't realize how much I judged people until I saw myself in your story. Thank you for reminding me to see before assuming." Lauren's throat tightened. For the first time in years, she felt proud not for being perfect, but for being honest. The next morning, she met David in the training center. They reviewed the next stage, integrating pilots, gate staff, and supervisors into reform workshops. David glanced at her notes. "You really took this program to heart?" Lauren looked up. "I owe it that much. I used to think flying was just about keeping people safe physically. Turns out, emotional safety matters too." He nodded. "You're not wrong. Respect keeps a plane in the air as much as engines do. She smiled. That sounds like something he'd say. David grinned. Maybe he's rubbing off on all of us. Later that day, Elias dropped by the training center unannounced. He walked through quietly, unnoticed at first, observing the participants' diverse faces, listening intently, engaging openly. When Lauren spotted him, she straightened instinctively. He gave a small nod, as if to say, "Keep going." She turned back to the class, voice steady. Every passenger who steps on your plane carries a story you can't see. Your job isn't to judge it, it's to protect it. Applause filled the room. Afterward, Elias approached her. "You've turned a wound into wisdom," he said. Lauren smiled. "And you turned anger into opportunity." He looked around the bustling training hall and said quietly, "That's how real justice works, not by punishment, but by transformation." Outside, through the tall glass windows, an airplane lifted into the sky. Its silver wings caught the sun, glowing like a promise. Nia's words echoed in his mind. "You were right about her." Elias watched the aircraft rise higher, then whispered, "No, she was right about herself." 6 months after the Sky Relearn program launched, Skyhaven Airways looked different. Posters lined employee corridors. Respect takes flight. Training sessions filled to capacity. Even the company newsletter featured stories about empathy, teamwork, and second chances. But progress never came without resistance. Beneath the surface, not everyone believed in change. Some employees whispered that the program was just for show. Others mocked the slogan in break rooms, saying it was political. Elias Carter heard about it through Rachel Price, who stood in his office one rainy afternoon, clutching a folder of reports. "Participation's up," she said, "but sincerity's not. Some people still think this is all corporate theater." Elias set his pen down. Culture doesn't shift in one season. "Rachel, you can't legislate conscience. You can only show it." She nodded, exhausted. "Sometimes I wish people could see what you saw that day on that plane. Maybe then they'd understand why this matters." He gave her a quiet smile. Most people don't change because they're told to. They change because something forces them to look in a mirror. Across town, Lauren Miller was facing her own test. She had been invited to lead a training session at Skyhaven's flagship hub in Dallas, a larger stage, with hundreds of flight attendants, pilots, and even mid-level executives in attendance. Standing backstage, she could feel the pulse in her wrists. The memory of that humiliating flight still lived somewhere in her chest, but now it pulsed as strength, not shame. David Brooks stood beside her, clipboard in hand. "Big crowd today," he said. Lauren exhaled slowly. "Bigger lesson." When her name was announced, she walked to the podium under the soft spotlight. The chatter faded. Faces turned toward her, some skeptical, some curious. She began. "6 months ago, I made a mistake that could have cost me everything. I judged a man before I even knew his name." The crowd shifted uneasily. "I thought I was following procedure. I thought I was protecting the airline. But what I was really protecting," she continued, "was my own comfort zone." She told the story simply, without drama, without self-pity. The hush in the room deepened until even the air felt still. "And here's what I learned," she said finally. "Empathy isn't about agreeing with someone. It's about giving them space to exist without suspicion." Applause started softly, then grew until it filled the hall. Rachel, watching from the back, wiped at the corner of her eye. Later, backstage, Lauren sat down beside David, shaking slightly. "I didn't think I could say it out loud again." He handed her a water bottle. "You didn't just say it. You owned it. Meanwhile, Elias was in Washington, D.C., attending a leadership summit on corporate ethics. He was one of the keynote speakers, a spot the media had been anticipating for weeks. When he took the stage, the room quieted. He began not with data, but with a story. "I once boarded a plane with my daughter," he said, voice steady. "We were treated as if we didn't belong where we were, and instead of getting angry, I decided to listen to what that moment could teach." He paused, scanning the audience. "We live in a time where power often answers insult with rage. But dignity," he said, "is the rarest form of strength. It doesn't shout, it transforms." By the time he finished, the hall stood in silence, not from shock, but from reflection. When applause finally came, it was long and heavy with respect. After the speech, a young reporter approached him. "Mr. Carter, may I ask, how did you forgive them?" He smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's refusing to let someone else's mistake define your purpose." That evening, his phone buzzed with a message from Nia. "Watched your speech online. You made me cry again." He replied, "Good. Maybe that means I'm still saying something worth feeling." Across the country, at the Dallas airport, Lauren received a different kind of message, one from an anonymous staff member who had attended her session. "My mother used to say people like you shouldn't be in charge of anyone. I thought she was right. After hearing you, I think she was wrong. Thank you." Lauren closed her eyes, letting the words settle. Change, she realized, wasn't measured in applause. It was measured in moments like this, quiet acknowledgments that hearts were shifting, one by one. Weeks later, back in New York, the Sky Relearn team gathered for a quarterly review. Rachel presented a slideshow of statistics: fewer customer complaints, improved morale, and even better teamwork scores from crew surveys. Elias listened silently, his expression unreadable. When the numbers ended, he asked, "And the people, how do they feel?" Rachel smiled slightly. "Scared," she admitted, "but hopeful." "Good," he said. "That means it's working." Lauren leaned forward. "Sir, there's something else. Some of the crew want to expand the program. They've been asking if we could create scholarships for aviation students from underrepresented backgrounds. They said it would be a way to give back." Elias looked at her, impressed. "That's a brilliant idea. Let's call it the Future Flight Initiative," David added. "We can tie it to Sky Relearn. Make education part of reform." Rachel was already jotting notes. "We can fund it through corporate social responsibility grants." For the first time in years, the room buzzed, not with tension, but with inspiration. As they left the meeting, Lauren lingered near the window, watching the sunset streak gold across the sky. Elias joined her. "You've built something lasting," he said. She shook her head. "We built it. I just followed the compass you set." He chuckled softly. "The compass was already in you. It just needed direction." At that moment, Nia called him on video. The screen lit with her smile. "Dad, you're supposed to be on your way to the airport." He grinned. "Old habits die hard. I got caught up changing the world again." Lauren laughed quietly, and for the first time, the three of them shared a moment that felt almost like family, a bridge built from one terrible misunderstanding that had become something beautiful. That night, Elias boarded another Skyhaven flight. No cameras, no entourage, just him, alone in 2A again. As the plane ascended, the city lights faded below. A young flight attendant stopped beside him with a warm smile. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." Welcome aboard. He looked up. Thank you. She handed him a drink in a crystal glass this time, from a few rows back. Lauren watched discreetly, supervising the new crew. When their eyes met briefly, she gave a subtle nod. Elias raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement. As the aircraft broke through the clouds, he looked out into the deep blue and thought of all that had changed, how a moment of humiliation had evolved into a culture of respect. For the first time in months, he let himself relax completely. Up here, above the turbulence, the world looked cleaner, quieter, like forgiveness carried on the wind. By spring, the Sky Relearn initiative had become more than a program. It was a movement. Training sessions expanded to airports across the country. The Future Flight Scholarships were already helping the first group of students enter aviation academies. And for the first time in its history, Skyhaven Airways began to be recognized not for its profits, but for its principles. Yet, success rarely came without turbulence. The morning began with a report that made Rachel Price's stomach sink. She hurried into Elias's office, where he was reviewing the quarterly data. The sunlight cut across the glass desk, catching the silver in his hair. "Elias," she began, "there's been an incident in Chicago." He looked up, alert but calm. "What kind of incident?" She placed a printed report in front of him. A passenger complained that one of our veteran captains refused to fly with a co-pilot from the Future Flight program, a young black woman named Alana Reed. He claimed she lacked seniority and experience. Elias's eyes hardened. And what did our internal team do? They grounded the flight temporarily. Alana handled it professionally. But social media caught wind before PR could respond. It's spreading fast. He read the report in silence for a long moment. Then he stood, straightening his tie, set up a meeting with everyone involved today. Within hours, the Chicago conference room filled with tense energy. Lauren sat beside Rachel, her expression drawn. David Brooks had flown in from New York, uniform still crisp, eyes focused. At the far end of the table sat Captain Richard Hayes, gray-haired, arms crossed, looking more defensive than remorseful. Elias entered last, his calm presence shifting the atmosphere. He took his seat, folding his hands before speaking. "Captain Hayes," he began, "I want to understand your decision yesterday." Hayes cleared his throat. "It wasn't personal, sir. I just didn't feel safe flying with someone that green. This is aviation. Mistakes cost lives." Elias's voice was even. "Ms. Reed is a certified co-pilot with over 1,200 flight hours. Her credentials exceed our minimum by 40%. So what, exactly, made you feel unsafe?" The older man hesitated. She didn't seem confident. "It's instinct." Lauren spoke softly. "Or assumption." Hayes turned to her. "You calling me biased?" David interjected calmly. "We're not here to accuse. We're here to understand how instinct can be influenced by what we expect to see," Rachel added. "Captain, the point of Sky Relearn isn't punishment, it's reflection. But reflection starts with honesty." The silence stretched. Finally, Elias leaned forward. "Do you know why this matters?" "Captain, because every time a qualified person is questioned for reasons that have nothing to do with skill, we teach everyone watching that prejudice is still allowed to take off." Hayes looked down, his confidence eroding. "I didn't mean it like that," Elias replied softly. "Few people ever do. That's what makes it dangerous." Across the room, Lauren watched him with quiet admiration. His tone wasn't harsh, yet every word landed with the weight of truth. Later, when the meeting ended, Hayes asked to speak privately with Elias. Lauren and Rachel stepped out, leaving them alone. Hayes stood awkwardly, eyes tired. "Mr. Carter, I've been flying for 30 years. The world's changed faster than some of us can keep up. I didn't mean to disrespect anyone." Elias regarded him steadily. "Change doesn't wait for comfort. Captain, it waits for courage." The man nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "You'll take part in the Advanced Sky Relearn workshops," Elias said, "and you'll mentor Ms. Reed for her next certification flight." Hayes blinked. "You want me to train her?" Elias's expression softened. "Yes. Sometimes redemption isn't about apologizing. It's about proving you can do better when given the chance." When Hayes left, Rachel returned. "That was risky," she said. Elias smiled faintly. "So was every flight humanity ever took." A week later, in a small simulator room at the Chicago hub, Alana Reed prepared for her certification check. Her instructor that day was none other than Captain Hayes. Lauren observed from the glass window, arms folded, watching closely. At first, the tension in the cockpit was palpable. Hayes's instructions were clipped, his tone formal. But as the simulation progressed, takeoff, turbulence recovery, emergency procedures, something shifted. Alana's confidence was undeniable. When the session ended, Hayes stood, cleared his throat, and said simply, "You handled that better than I could have." She smiled, eyes shining. "Thank you, Captain." He nodded. "Quieter this time. Just call me Richard." Outside, Lauren couldn't stop smiling. She sent a quick message to Elias. Chicago storm cleared. Both pilots landed safely, figuratively and literally. He replied moments later, "Good. That's how you know reform is flying on its own." That night, at Skyhaven headquarters, a company-wide email went out subject a milestone for Sky Relearn Body today. Captain Richard Hayes and First Officer Alana Reed completed a successful certification flight together. This moment symbolizes what our program stands for: growth, trust, and courage to change. The story spread quickly across the airline's internal network. Employees who had once doubted the initiative began to see something tangible, proof that progress could look like two people, once divided by bias, now united in professionalism. In New York, Nia was reading the same announcement on her laptop while waiting for her father to finish a call. "You really did it," she said, when he hung up. Elias smiled. "No, they did it. We just gave them a reason to try." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you think it'll last?" He nodded. Change lasts when it stops being a rule and starts being a habit. The next morning, Lauren arrived early at the training center to prepare for a new class. As she arranged materials, she noticed a small gift bag on her desk. Inside was a keychain shaped like an airplane wing, engraved with the words "From Flight 241 to Future Flight Keep Flying." There was no note, but she didn't need one. A few hours later, she led her session with renewed passion. "If you remember one thing from today," she told the group, "remember that respect isn't a company policy. It's a choice we make in every moment, with every person." At that same hour, Elias and Rachel were meeting with investors. One of them, an older executive, said, "Your program's impressive, Mr. Carter, but tell me, what's the end goal here?" "Public image, diversity, numbers." Elias smiled calmly. "Neither. The end goal is to build an airline where decency doesn't need a headline." When the meeting adjourned, Rachel walked beside him, thoughtful. "You know, that line belongs in our mission statement." "Then put it there," he said, eyes glinting. "Make it permanent." As evening fell, the final rays of sunlight spilled through the tall glass walls of Skyhaven headquarters. In that glow, The reflection of every poster, every photograph, every word "respect takes flight" seemed to shimmer with meaning. Elias stood by the window for a long moment, watching a plane lift into the fiery orange sky. He whispered quietly, "We've come a long way, Nia," and somewhere in that same sky, miles away, a flight carried two pilots, one seasoned, one new, both proof that change, when given wings, could soar higher than anyone ever expected. A year had passed since Elias Carter first boarded that fateful flight, the one that had begun as humiliation and ended as transformation. The world around Skyhaven Airways had shifted quietly but profoundly. Posters that once felt like corporate slogans had become lived values. Crews who once hesitated to speak up now corrected bias mid-flight, without fear. The air itself, it seemed, had changed. That morning, Elias stood before a packed auditorium at the airline's New York headquarters, banners reading, "Sky Relearn." 1 year later framed the stage. Hundreds of employees filled the room. Flight attendants, mechanics, executives, pilots, and scholarship recipients from the Future Flight Initiative. Rachel introduced him with a tone of genuine warmth. "A year ago, he didn't ask us to defend our actions. He asked us to redefine them. Please welcome the man whose leadership taught us how to turn turbulence into trust, Mr. Elias Carter." Applause rolled through the hall. Elias approached the podium, his expression calm but luminous. He took a breath before speaking. "When this journey began," he said, "I told myself that justice in silence is still justice. But I learned that sometimes silence only lets old wounds breathe longer. We needed to speak not to shame, but to heal." He looked around the room, his gaze landing briefly on Lauren, who sat beside David in the front row, both nodding quietly. He continued, "We've trained thousands of employees, supported students through Future Flight, and watched as people turned apology into purpose. But the real success isn't in our statistics, it's in the stories you've built from them." Behind him, a large screen displayed video clips Captain Hayes guiding Alana Reed through flight drills, Lauren teaching a class on empathy, Nia visiting aviation students at a small flight school, laughing and handing out flight manuals. The audience watched, some with tears in their eyes. When the video ended, Elias said softly, "Change doesn't fly on policy, it flies on people." Thunderous applause followed, but he lifted a hand, quieting the room. "Before we celebrate, let me tell you what happened last week. It reminded me why this work can never stop." The room stilled. He explained, "At one of our partner airports, a passenger reported being treated dismissively because of her accent. The staff member involved had completed Sky Relearn training. So, I asked myself, did we fail? Or did we forget that change is a daily choice?" He paused, letting the words settle. Programs don't end prejudice. People do when they choose to see beyond assumption every single day. In the audience, Lauren felt a deep ache in her chest, a mix of humility and pride. She whispered to David, "He never lets anyone get comfortable, does he?" David smiled faintly. "That's how he keeps us honest." After the ceremony, in the quiet backstage area, Lauren approached Elias. "That story you told it hit home. Sometimes I think we'll never be done with this work." He looked at her kindly. "That's the point. Lauren, growth isn't a destination. It's a flight with no final landing." She nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'll keep flying." "Good," he said, "because people like you remind the rest of us why the sky's worth reaching." Hours later, the team gathered for a private dinner, a celebration of the 1-year milestone. Nia joined them, glowing with pride. When she raised her glass, her words carried the same quiet conviction her father had taught her. To the people who proved that grace can fly higher than ego, and to my dad, who never fought to win, he fought to fix. Laughter and cheers filled the room. Elias shook his head gently, smiling. You always make me sound wiser than I am. Lauren grinned. Maybe that's because you are, Rachel chimed in. Or maybe because we finally started listening. The night carried on with warmth, laughter, and quiet gratitude, but later, when the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Elias stepped outside to the balcony overlooking the glittering skyline. The city pulsed with movement, planes gliding above, headlights below, life continuing in rhythm. Lauren found him there, leaning against the rail, lost in thought. Still working, she teased softly. He smiled, without turning. Always. They stood in silence for a while, watching a plane ascend through the evening haze. Do you ever think, she asked, about that first flight? About how different things could have gone if you just stayed silent? He turned toward her. Every day. But sometimes the worst moments give birth to the best directions. That day, I saw a mirror of what the world still needed to face, and instead of breaking it, I chose to hold it up. Lauren nodded, voice low. You changed more than an airline. He looked up at the stars flickering faintly above the city glow. No, he said. We just reminded people that dignity is a kind of gravity. It holds everything together. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Paris, a Skyhaven training facility had just finished its first international Sky Relearn session. A trainee handed her instructor a postcard featuring the program's motto, Respect Takes Flight. The instructor smiled and said, It started in one country, but it belongs to everyone now. Back in New York. The next morning dawned with a soft golden light. Nia accompanied her father to the airport. He was scheduled to fly to Atlanta for a board meeting on Skyhaven Flight 241, the same route where everything began. As they reached the gate, Lauren and Rachel were already waiting to see him off. The air buzzed with anticipation. Before boarding, Nia hugged him tightly. You sure you don't want me to come along? He chuckled. You've got school, young lady. Besides, I think I can handle one short flight without causing a revolution. Lauren laughed. We'll hold you to that. As he stepped into the jet bridge, passengers greeted him warmly, some recognizing him, others simply offering a polite smile. In seat 2A, he settled back, eyes closing briefly as the engines hummed to life. When the plane began to taxi, a voice came over the intercom. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, Richard Hayes, joined by First Officer Alana Reed. It's our honor to have Mr. Carter aboard today. The man who taught us all that respect is the runway to progress. A ripple of applause swept through the cabin. Elias opened his eyes, surprised but touched. Lauren, seated nearby as part of the onboard evaluation team, smiled through tears she didn't bother to hide. As the plane lifted smoothly into the sky, sunlight flooded the cabin. The clouds parted like a curtain, revealing endless blue. Elias looked out the window, his reflection merging with the sky beyond. Nia's words echoed faintly in his mind. You never fought to win. You fought to fix. He smiled to himself. At 30,000 feet, surrounded by the hum of engines and the quiet dignity of change. Elias Carter closed his eyes, not in exhaustion, but in peace. The world below was still imperfect, still learning, but somewhere in its airways, a new kind of flight was rising, one fueled not by power, but by respect. This story reminds us that power doesn't always roar. it often whispers. Elias Carter didn't use anger to prove his worth. He used integrity to teach a lesson the world could feel. His calm response to humiliation became a blueprint for how to turn injustice into progress. In life, we all face moments where we're underestimated, dismissed, or unseen. We can choose to strike back, or we can rise higher. Showing others that respect is not something we beg for, but something we embody. True leadership, as Elias showed, isn't about control. It's about compassion with boundaries, forgiveness with purpose, and justice with humility. For older audiences who have lived through decades of change, this story speaks softly but powerfully. Growth never ends. The way we respond to unfairness, especially when we hold power, can heal or harm the generations that follow. And sometimes, the quietest choice, the choice to fix, not fight, echoes the longest. Thank you for watching this story of courage, change, and second chances. If it touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every story we tell is a reminder that kindness and integrity still matter, and that we can all be part of building a more compassionate world. Your support helps these stories reach more people who believe, like you, that dignity can change everything. See you in the next story.